Hello and welcome to this episode of Hampton Roads Business Live. Today my special guest is Brett Thompson of the Thompson Law Group. How you doing, Brett?
I'm doing real well. Thank you for having me.
Good. I haven't seen you in a little while, but we go back a ways. And
We do.
yeah, I understand that you have a practice that's, well, it's not new, but it's several years old now, 3 years old or so.
We're going on the third year mark. That's true.
Right. And go ahead and tell us a little bit about your practice. Give us kind of an overview of what you do.
Well, the name of the practice is Thompson Law Group. Me being the Thompson in the law group. It's a small practice. It's myself, and I have one associate attorney named Mike Jenkins, and we have 3 paralegals. Primarily, my practice focuses on commercial and residential real estate transactions, corporate law. I represent different small business owners all throughout Hampton Roads, and civil litigation, which I explain that as people fussing over money and breach of contract matters. My associate, Mike Jenkins, he was a public defender in Norfolk for 5 years before he came on board with my firm about 1.5 years ago. So he's got a lot of trial experience, and he focuses on criminal defense, traffic law, personal injury, and family law.
Well, I know that there's a number of ways you can go when it comes to commercial, real estate, commercial residential real estate, where some people haven't chosen to use an attorney.
Right.
But why should they use an attorney? That's because I mean I talk about this before,
Right.
And something to think about.
Well, I try to distinguish myself, if you will. In Virginia, you can have lease settlement companies, title companies, commonly known as, and they're authorized to perform closings for real estate transactions. But one thing I want to point out and make people aware of is that unless there's an in-house attorney employed at the title company, the representatives of the title company cannot give their customers any legal advice as to the implications of any of the documents. If you go to an attorney, I sit down personally with my clients. I go over the note and the deed of trust and all the financing documents, and I'm able under the law to advise my clients what the documents mean and what are the legal implications of the documents. And I think that's important. It's a relatively expensive transaction when people are buying homes.
Probably the largest transaction.
Yeah, more than likely the largest transaction. So I think it's important to have legal advice along the way.
Okay. Now you also work with companies. When you set up companies for what, corporations or
Right.
Subchapter S?
I represent a lot of small business owners, and I want to emphasize to people that it's important to form a corporate entity. If somebody's out there and they're an entrepreneur and they start up their own company, and maybe they're a roofer, or they've got a company that does siding or something, if it's just John Doe as John's Roofing, there's no corporate entity that can protect that person. So if your company car ran into somebody, or if there was an accident on the job, creditors and plaintiffs would sue you individually, the person, John Doe, and not the corporate entity. And then if you go down the road, inevitably, if they won the case, they could seize your personal assets, your personal bank account, levy on your real estate, levy on your personal property. So it's very important that you want to start transacting business to form a corporate shell or a corporate entity, and you hold yourself out as the company, and you are an officer of the company, but it's not yourself individually transacting the business. Therefore, if there's a breach of contract or a personal injury or property damage, the recourse would be against the corporate entity and the assets of the corporate entity, and you'd be sheltered from your own personal assets and your personal bank account and your cash.
Right. All right. So now there's a number of different ways you can do that. I guess it's a corporation. There's a Subchapter S corporation, LLC.
Right. So there are many different corporate entities that can be formed in Virginia. One being the limited liability company, which right now is the most common. There is the corporate entity. Corporate entity is it can be an S corp or a C corp, and that's really a distinction for tax purposes.
Right.
How the federal government views the entity and what kind of tax returns it has to file. But there is no distinction in regards to the limiting of the liability of the individuals, the principals of the company. LLC is comprised of members, and if there's more than one member, oftentimes we will draft an operating agreement, which is the contract, if you will, that dictates the relationship amongst the members of the LLC. If it's a corporate entity, a corporate entity is comprised of shareholders, and the shareholders will have stock to indicate their percentage ownership in the company. And then corporations will have bylaws, and the bylaws are similar to the operating agreement, where it dictates, how the meetings are made, notices, provisions. How do you wind down the company? How do you extinguish the company? How do you sell the company? How do you sell your stock? So there's a lot of working parts in regards to it. But the decision whether to go with an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp is really a tax decision. And I can form any of those companies, but I always refer my clients to their accountant or their CPA.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
Yeah, to get their opinion in regards to the tax implications up front, so we can form the correct entity right from the start.
I see. Okay, so now let's talk about your civil litigation services, things. Give us some examples of what kind of, is this automobile accidents and things like that, or
the firm,
personal injury?
Yeah, the firm does automobile, which is in the law it's considered a tort, commonly known as personal injury.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jenkins is my associate attorney. He focuses his practice on that.
Okay.
So more times than often, he'll be meeting with our personal injury clients. As far as my individual practice, it's mostly geared towards breach of contracts and also real estate litigation.
Right. So you're real estate and business.
Right. Real estate, and heavy real estate, and in business, and is the root of all evil, I guess. And it's definitely, if it's not the root of all evil, it's the cause of a lot of arguments. And anytime there's not a meeting of the mind, and someone feels that they've been betrayed in a sense, and they've lost money, that's when we get into civil litigation, which mm-hmm. I plainly explain it as people fussing over money.
Right.
And that can be stemming from a real estate contract. It can stem from a contract for services rendered, a contract to sell or buy a business.
Right.
So if the wheels come off on any of those transactions and it turns into litigation, I also handle the litigation portion.
And you practice law in all the cities?
All the cities, primarily in Hampton Roads.
Right.
I rarely go out of Hampton Roads, but yeah, the 7 cities, I base my practice on.
And where is your office?
My office is physically located in the RAIN building. It's the Real Estate Information Network building. It's a big 3-story brick building, which you can see right off of the interstate. But it's physically located near the intersection of Bonnie Road and Independence.
Oh, you're right there in town center.
Right at town center.
Oh, that's convenient.
Yeah, and we like it. We've been there for a little over 2 years now.
I was just in town center today, so
there we go.
We should have stopped by.
There we go.
Okay, and I understand this is off the topic of law, but I understand that you have a interesting sideline there, hobby you might call it, and I would assume that if you lost the case, you could win it this way.
Well, I'm a lover and not a fighter, Roy, but. When I'm not practicing law, playing lawyer, if you will, I teach a martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Ever since a kid, I wrestled through high school and college, and after I graduated from VMI in 1997, I started training here locally at Lynx Academy in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if anybody is familiar with the UFC, which is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, it's mm-hmm. popular now on cable networks.
Right.
All of the ground fighting, all the stuff you see when the combatants go down to the ground, that's pretty much all jiu-jitsu. So that's how I explain to people that, because they don't really understand what it is. It's like wrestling, but with no rules, and there's submissions, and there's chokes, and joint locks, and different ways to end the fight.
Not to interrupt you, but mm-hmm. you're being modest. You were very good at this, right? If I recall correctly.
Back in my youth.
Yes.
When I was a single man before I got married and had children.
You're blaming your wife now.
No, I love you so much. And I'm not blaming my wife. But things slowed down a little bit when I started ramping up my family and my practice. Mm-hmm. But I have traveled all around the world competing in jiu-jitsu. I placed in the World Championships in Rio de Janeiro in 2003. And I'm fortunate enough right now where I get to work with the Navy SEALs base on the East Coast here, where I teach the SEAL teams,
Do you?
the combatives on the ground.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
So that's been a really fun bit of knowing the craft. I've got to meet a lot of the SEAL team guys and teach them the jiu-jitsu. So that was a neat experience for me.
But you don't use it in court.
I do not.
No,
I do not. Yeah.
I didn't think so. Is there anything that you've got your own business now and all? Is there anything that you found was harder than you thought it would be in going on your own business?
It's yes, yes.
Yes.
Well, when you're I was with a firm for almost 9 years, and at the firm, I just had to wear the attorney hat. And I had to just focus on my practice as an attorney. But I learned when I broke out on my own nearly 3 years ago that there's a lot of working parts of being an entrepreneur and a business owner. So I wear several hats now. I'm the marketing division. I'm the accounting division on the weekends. I'm cutting checks and reconciling bank accounts. And there's and I'm writing the checks for all the pens and pads and the copy machines and everything else. So there's a lot to go into it. So. From that aspect, I have a much greater appreciation, I guess, for my clients that are small business owners, because I know there's a lot that goes into it. Right. And, I don't have a steady paycheck every 2 weeks from an employer. Myself and other entrepreneurs, small business owners, they either make it or they don't. So yeah. I have a lot of appreciation for that.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And there's a real value of fear.
Yeah. It's a motivator when you can't eat.
Right. Yeah. The fear of my children starving is a real motivator.
Right. Okay. So that's the surprise part of being an entrepreneur. How about if you had to advise someone who's thinking about going into business? Can you give us 3 things that you might recommend that they consider or do?
Three things that I could recommend.
Yeah, that you would say.
Yeah.
Be sure that you.
I would have somewhat of a nest egg before I took that plunge out on my own. I'd have a reserve account, because I found that I tried to be conservative with my estimates, but I found that everything cost more than I thought it did.
Right.
So that was a little scary at first.
And surprise costs come up too.
Surprise costs, life happens and surprise costs come up. So you really, when you're running your numbers, if you will, before you go out, you really want to be conservative and throw in some just extra hedge figures on, things that you can't control, because there's always things that you can't control that are going to be. Number 2, if you love what you do and you feel like that, this is really your craft, I would recommend doing it now and not waiting, because for myself, it was very liberating and exciting to be able to kind of blaze my own trail, if you will. And after I got out and I learned that I was not going to starve to death, and this was actually something I could do, for the rest of my life and be successful at it, I wish that I had left earlier. That was my only regret.
And you don't want to go back.
And I don't want to go back. I really can't see myself working a 9 to 5 for someone else anymore. So I've seen it from the other perspective now, and I really would prefer to be on the entrepreneurial side of things.
Right. Well, I know that you are getting ready to go on a much-needed vacation. So I know that you're a really busy guy, but I really appreciate you coming in today. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to mention?
I don't think seeing you again. I haven't seen you in a few years, I guess.
Yeah. And so if you're looking for an attorney, real estate or personal injury or civil or business law, give the Thompson Law Group a call. The number is at the bottom of the page. Their contact information is at the bottom of the page and at the end of this video. So I thank you very much for coming in. And,
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And I wish you a lot of success.
Thank you, Roy.
All right, thank you.